Hello all, hope you are doing well. In the last video, we have seen the important clauses of IS 456 section 2, and in this video we are going to see the important clauses in the section 3. Suppose if you have not watched the important clauses in the section 2, the link was given in the description. First you can watch that, then you can come to this video. Okay, so let us start it. Now whatever the section 3 is there, that gives the idea about the general design consideration. That means these clauses are applicable for both working stress method as well as the limit state method. Now this general design consideration involves, so what are the various types of loads on the structure and what are the stability checks we have to make, and along with that it also gives various clauses related to the slabs, beam and columns. Okay, and it also gives some clauses for the bond, torsion, spacing between the reinforcement, all these things. Okay, so remember that most of these clauses are applicable to both working stress method as well as the limit state method. Now the first important clause is clause number 19.1, and as per this clause a structure must be designed by considering the dead load, imposed load, wind load, and you should also consider the forces due to the earthquake, and sometimes we should also consider the effects due to the shrinkage, creep and temperature. Okay, we have to consider the effect of shrinkage, creep and temperature also. Then whatever the dead load you consider in the RCC structure, okay, whatever the dead load you consider in the RCC structure, if it involves PCC, okay, if it involves PCC, then dead load must be taken as 24 kilonewton per meter cube. If it is RCC, it must be taken as 25 kilonewton per meter cube. Okay, for PCC dead load is considered as 24 kilonewton per meter cube. For RCC dead load is considered as 25 kilonewton per meter cube. Okay, next class is related to the stability. So basically stability involves two parameters here. Okay, stability involves two parameters. First one is the overturning and second one is related to the sliding. Now if you see this class, this is related to the overturning. So whatever the overturning is there, okay, whatever the overturning is there, that must be resisted. Okay, whatever the overturning is there, that must be resisted. Now that restoring moment, that resisting moment should be greater than or equal to, okay, resisting moment should be greater than or equal to 1.2 times the maximum overturning moment due to the characteristic dead load. That means it must be greater than or equal to 1.2 times of the overturning moment due to the dead load plus 1.4 times the maximum overturning moment due to the characteristic imposed load. 1.4 times overturning moment due to the imposed load. Okay, so that is the first check we have to make. Okay, then sometimes what happens is whatever the dead load is there, okay, sometimes what happens is whatever the dead load is there, that causes the restoring moment, especially if you consider the retaining wall. Okay, if you consider the retaining wall, in that case dead load causes the restoring moment. So now in that case, whatever the restoring moment is there, okay, whatever the restoring moment is there, that must be greater than or equal to 1.4 times of overturning moment due to imposed load. But now whatever the restoring moment is there, that is because of what? Dead load. So in that case, it must be multiplied with 0.9 times. Okay, dead load must be multiplied with 0.9 times. So it will become like 0.9 times restoring moment due to dead load. Okay, whatever the restoring moment is there, that must be considered as 0.9 times of restoring moment due to the dead load. The clause is regarding the sliding. So the factor of safety for the sliding must be greater than or equal to 1.4. Okay, factor of safety for the sliding must be greater than or equal to 1.4. Then again, if the dead load causes the resistance against the sliding, okay, if the dead load causes the resisting against the sliding, obviously dead load only causes the resisting against sliding. So in that case, it has to be multiplied with 0.9 again. So remember that wherever dead load causes the resisting force or resisting moment, it must be multiplied with 0.9. Okay. Then suppose if you take a structure when the wind load is there, okay, when the wind load is there, it will be subjected to the sway like this. It will be subjected to the sway like this. Now, because of the sway, there will be some deflection here. This should not be greater than h by 500, where h is the height of the structure. Okay. So under transient wind load, transient means nothing but temporary. So because wind loads are not permanent. So under the temporary wind load, the lateral sway at the top, okay, lateral sway at the top, that should not exceed how much? H by 500. That is the thing. Then next class is related to the effective span of the structure, okay, effective span of the beams. Now first if you consider a simply supported beam, okay, if you consider a simply supported beam, in the simply supported beam, this may be the effective depth, suppose. Okay, this may be the effective depth. Effective depth means we will measure it to the centroid of the tensile reinforcement. Okay, we will measure it to the centroid of the tensile reinforcement. And whatever the support width is there, let us say that as small b. Okay, support width I am considering as small b and effective depth I am considering as d. And whatever this distance is there, that is the LC, clear span, let us say. Okay, that is the clear span. Then in this case, effective span, LE equal to LC plus D or LC plus B, whichever is less we have to take. Okay, whichever is less. Now suppose let us say clear span is 5 meter and support width is 0.3 meter and this D is 0.4 meter. Okay, D is 0.4 meter, effective depth is 0.4 meter. Then in this case, what will be the effective span? That will be equal to 5 plus 0.4 or 5 plus 0.3, whichever is less. So 5.3 meter will be the effective span. So like that it is calculated for the simply supported beam. Okay, next one is the continuous beam. So now if you take a continuous beam like this, then in this case in this condition again there are two cases. Okay, let us see the case one first. So what is this case one is, now whatever this span is there, that means whatever the clear span is there, okay, and this is the support width, let us say. Okay, so support width is B and clear span is LC. Now case one is when support width is less than LC by 12. Okay, support width is less than clear span by 12. In this condition, effective span is calculated in the same manner as simply supported beam. That means however you have calculated LC plus D or LC plus B, whichever is less, the same thing you have to apply when the support width is less than clear span by 12. Now next one is the case 2. Okay, what is this case 2 is, now whatever the B is there, that may be greater than LC by 12 or 600 mm. Okay, B may be greater than LC by 12 or 600 mm. In this condition, if one of the support is fixed and if another support is continuous like this, okay, one of the support is fixed, another support is continuous like this, then in this condition it is taken as clear span. Okay, that means effective span will be equal to clear span. Okay, so if B is greater than LC by 12 or 600 mm, then in that condition, if one of the end is fixed, if another end is continuous like this, another support is continuous like this, then LE should be taken as clear span. Then if the condition is like this, okay, if the condition is like this, that means one of the support is continuous Okay, one of the support is continuous and another support is discontinuous. Okay, one of the support is continuous like this, another support is discontinuous like this. That means after this there is no span. So now in this condition, effective span will be taken as LE will be taken as minimum of LC plus B by 2 or LC plus D by 2. Already you know what is D here. D means effective depth and B means support width. So you have to take minimum of LC plus B by 2 or LC plus D by 2. Like that we have to calculate if one of the support is continuous and another support is discontinuous but freely placed. Okay, that means we are freely placing here. There is no fixed support. Okay, then next one is the cantilever. Again in the cantilever, two conditions are there. One is if the cantilever is placed by the fixed end. Okay, one is if the cantilever is placed by the fixed end like this. Another one is if the cantilever is formed by the continuous support like this. Okay, one is cantilever formed by the fixed end, another one is cantilever formed by the continuous end. Now if the cantilever is formed by the fixed end, then this is the clear span here. Then effective span equal to LE equal to LC plus D by 2 directly. Okay, LE equal to LC plus D by 2. Now in this condition, B is the support width here and LC is the clear span. Okay, B is the support width and LC is the clear span. Then in this condition, LE is taken as LC plus B by 2. Okay, LC plus B by 2. So if the cantilever is formed by the fixed end, then it is LC plus D by 2. If the cantilever is formed by the continuous support, then it is LC plus B by 2. Like that it is calculated. Now if you take the frames, irrespective of the support condition, okay, irrespective of the support condition, it is always taken from center to center like this. Okay, so in the frames LE equal to center to center distance. Okay, so like this we have to calculate the effective spans in various conditions. And next class is related to the moment and shear coefficients. Okay, moment and shear coefficient. And basically if you take the simply supported beam, or cantilever beam, okay, simply supported beam or cantilever beam, you can easily calculate the bending moments and you can also calculate the shear forces easily. Okay, why? Because they are determinate structures, so you can determine the bending moment and shear force easily. But if you have a continuous beam, okay, okay, see this, unless more exact estimates are made for beams of uniform cross section which suppose substantially uniformly distributed load over 3 or more spans. Okay, 3 or more spans are there, that means it is continuous in nature, which do not differ by more than 15% of the longest. Okay, so let us see that. Now you have 3 spans like this. Okay, you have 3 spans like this. Now this may be the longest span here. Okay, suppose this is the span 1, this is the span 2 and this is the span 3. This span 3 may be the longest one. Then whatever the variation in length is there, whatever the variation in span length is there, that should not be more than 15%. Then in that condition, okay, which do not differ by more than 15% of the longest, then in that condition, bending moment and shear force used in design may be obtained using the coefficients given in table number 12 and table 30. Because if you take the continuous beam, it will be the indeterminate structure. So every time determining the bending moment coefficient takes a long time. That's why IS code is suggesting some bending moment coefficients and shear coefficients here. Okay, bending moment coefficients and shear coefficient. Now, whatever the coefficients are given here, if you multiply them with total design load and effective span, okay, total design load and effective span, okay, that means W, let us say capital W is the total design load and effective span is L. So if you multiply this coefficient with W into L, then you will get the bending moment at that point. Okay, now let us see how to determine this bending moments for a given continuous beam. So this continuous beam consists of 5 spans like this. Now in these 5 spans, whatever the S1 and S6 are there, they are the end supports, and S2 and S5 are there, they are the supports next to the end supports, and S3 and S4 are considered as the interior supports. Then similarly, if you take the span 1 and span 5, okay, span 1 and span 5, they are considered as end spans, and span 2, 3, 4, they are considered as the interior spans. So now at the end, if you take at the supports, okay, if you take at the end supports, what will be the bending moment here? At the end supports, bending moment will be 0. Okay, then at the remaining supports, at all the remaining supports, what will be the bending moment? Bending moment will be negative in nature. And at the middle of the spans, at middle of spans, what will be the bending moment? Positive. That means these things I am saying considering UDL on the span. Completely UDL is there. So when the UDL is there completely, at the end supports bending moment will be 0. At the remaining supports bending moment will be negative. And at the middle of the span bending moment will be positive. That's the condition. Then if you take at the supports S2 and S4, sorry, S2 and S5, they are called as what? Support next to the end support. And whatever the load is there, okay, whatever this load is there, let us say that consists of 2 components. One is the WD, another one is the WL. WD means dead load plus non-fixed imposed load. Okay, fixed imposed load. Dead load plus a fixed imposed load. And W2 is non-fixed imposed load. That means sometimes it will be there and sometimes it will not be there. Okay, WL it is. Okay, now as I said, at S1 and S6 end supports, what will be the bending moment? Directly 0. And S2 and S5 bending moment will be like this. Okay, S2 and S5, that means support moments. Okay, support moments, they will be like this. So for the dead load and imposed load, bending moment coefficient is -1/10. So you have to write it like -1/10 WD into L minus 1/9 into WL into L. So like this you have to write. Now if you take the supports which are next to the end supports, okay, supports which are next to the, sorry, if you take it the interior supports, that means S3 and S4, okay, S3 and S4, then at that the bending moment will be -1/12 WD into L minus 1/9 into WD into L. So like this we have to determine the bending moments. Similarly, if you take the interior spans, okay, if you take the middle spans, then end spans are S1, end spans are span 1 and span 5, and span 2, 3, 4 are the interior span. So for the end spans if you take, that means for span 1 and span 5, middle I am taking. Okay, span 1 and span 5 at middle I am taking. So if you take it middle, bending moment will be what? Positive always. Now at that point bending moment will be WD into L divided by 10 plus WL into L divided by 12, like that it is. Now if you take it the span, if you take it the span 2, 3, 4, again at the middle, then bending moment will be what? Positive or negative? Again it will be positive. At all the middle point, at the all middle of the spans, bending moment will be positive. So this will be like WD into L divided by 12 plus WD into L divided by 16. WL into L by 16. So like this, just for this bending moment coefficient, you have to multiply with total design load and effective span, then you will get the total bending moment at that point. Now for the shear coefficients also it is the same. Okay, for the shear force also it is the same. Let us see that. So for the shear force, we have to determine at the supports. Shear force you have to determine at the supports. Once if you determine it at the supports, then based on the loading here, you can determine the shear force at any other point. So now if you take the supports S1 and S6, they are the end supports. S2 and S5, they are the supports next to the end supports, and S3 and S4 are the interior supports. Okay, so see the first condition here at the end support. Okay, first one is at the end support. At the end support, coefficients are what? 0.4 and 0.45 for the dead load and imposed load which is not fixed. Now for obtaining shear force, the coefficient shall be multiplied by the total design load directly. That means these things, whatever the W is there here, suppose on this span total load is W, then to determine the shear force at these two things, S1 and S6, what we have to do is we have to take it like 0.4 WD into S1 and S6. Okay, 0.4 WD plus 0.5 WD simply. Sorry. 0.4 WD plus 0.45 WD. Okay, then if you take the next two conditions, okay, if you take the next one, at the support next to the end support, okay, support next to the end support, and again outer side and inner side are there. So you have to consider two conditions here, outer side and inner side. So if you take the support next to the end support, this will be the outer side and this will be the inner side. So if you take like S2 and S5 outer side, okay, S2 and S5 outer side, then it will be 0.6 WD plus 0.6 WD, okay, 0.6 WL. And if you take S2 and S5 inner side, S2 and S5 inner side, then it will be like 0.55 WD plus 0.6 WL, like that we will take. Now what are the supports remaining here? Interior supports, they are S3 and S4. Okay, so if you take S3 and S4, then it is 0.5 and 0.6. So directly you can write like 0.5 WD plus 0.5 WD plus 0.6 WL. So like this we will write. Okay, so now see this clearly. If it is S1 and S6, then directly we will multiply the load with, we will multiply the dead load and fixed imposed load with 0.4 and the live load with, and that means non-fixed imposed load with 0.45. Okay, this is 0.45 WL again. Okay, similarly for S2 and S5 outer side we have to determine differently. That means for support next to end support, outer side shear coefficients will be different, inner side shear coefficient will be different. Then last one is the interior supports. Okay, these interior supports, then at that point it is 0.5 WD and 0.6 WL, like that you have to determine. Okay, so hope it is clear. So just whatever the coefficient available, that you have to multiply with load and effective span in order to get the bending moments, only with load in order to get the shear forces. Okay, then where a member is built into a masonry wall, okay, suppose a beam is there like this, then this beam is not going into any column like this, but here it is the masonry wall. then whatever this masonry wall is there, that will partially restrain the beam. Okay, that will partially restrain the beam. Then at this point, whatever the bending moment is there here, whatever the bending moment is there here, that will be equal to WL by 24. So bending moment at this point should be taken as how much? WL by 24, where W is the total design load. You should not consider dead load and live load independently here. We have to consider it as a total design load. Okay, that's the clause. Okay, so this condition is applicable. This condition is applicable only when the member is going into the masonry wall, which develops the partial restraint. This clause is related to the critical sections of the shear. Okay, so now suppose if you take a cantilever beam. Okay, if you take a cantilever beam like this, then in this case critical section will be at the face of the support. Okay, critical section will be at the face of the support. So now we have to determine the shear here, we have to determine the shear force here. Complete beam has to be designed for the same shear. Okay, complete beam has to be designed for the same shear. That's what the clause says. The shear computed at the face of the support shall be used in the design of the member at that section, except in case of 22.6.2.1. What is that clause? You will see now. 22.6.2.1. Now consider a simply supported beam like this. Consider a simply supported beam like this. Now in case of the simply supported beam, here whatever the reaction is there, okay, on the member, whatever the reaction is on the support, whatever the reaction is there, that is basically compressive in nature. So now whenever a compressive reaction is induced, okay, whenever the compressive reaction is induced, critical section should be taken at the distance of d from the face of the support. The critical section has to be taken at a distance of d from the face of the support. That means usually in this case shear force will be higher at this part, higher at this section, but still we should not determine the shear here. Instead we have to determine the shear at this distance, at the distance of d from the face of the support. And even this portion also has to be designed for the same shear force. It has to be designed for the same shear force. So remember that in the cantilever, critical section will be at the face of the support, and wherever there is a compressive reaction, that means in case of the simply supported beam, it will be at a distance of d from the face of the support. That's the point. Then next class is related to the definition of the effective depth. Okay, next class is related to the definition of the effective depth. So what is this effective depth is? Now if you take the beam like this, so this total depth, I am denoting with capital D suppose. Then whatever the reinforcement is there, suppose reinforcement is there at this point, then this will be the centroid of the reinforcement. Okay, this will be the centroid of the reinforcement. Now when this is the centroid of the reinforcement, the distance measured from the centroid of the tensile reinforcement to extreme compression fiber, that is called as effective depth. But in few conditions, reinforcement may be like this. In few conditions, reinforcement may be like this. That is, reinforcement is placed in layers. Now in this condition, you can calculate the centroid. Okay, you can calculate the centroid, which may come up to this point. Then in this condition, this will be the effective depth. Okay, usually we denote it with small d. So this will be the effective depth. So effective depth means it is the distance between centroid of the area of tension reinforcement and the maximum compression fiber. This is the maximum compression fiber. This is the centroid of the tension reinforcement. So this distance is called as what? Effective depth. Now whatever this effective depth concept is there, that will not apply to what? Deep beams. Okay, that will not apply to the deep beams. What is deep beams? That we will see in the section 4. Okay, deep beams will be seen in the section 4. Then next one is related to the clauses of flanged beams. Okay, this is the clause related to the flanged beams. So you know what is a flanged beam? Flanged beam means whatever the beam has a web and a flange portion like this. Now, any beam to become a flanged beam, two conditions it has to satisfy. Okay, to become a flanged beam, a beam has to satisfy two conditions. First one is the slab shall be cast integrally with the web. Okay, slab shall be cast integrally with the web, or the web and the slab shall be effectively bonded together in any other manner. Either they must cast integrally or else they must be bonded. Okay, now whatever the slab portion is there, that will act as the flange. Whatever this beam portion is there, that will act as the web. Okay, so like that is. Then second condition is if the main reinforcement of the slab is parallel to the beam. Okay, now suppose this is the slab and these are the beams. Now main reinforcement in the slab is maybe in this direction. Main reinforcement of the slab is parallel to the beam. Then in that condition, the transverse reinforcement will be in this direction. Okay, so this is the main reinforcement and this is the transverse reinforcement. Okay, so whatever this transverse reinforcement is there, that must be 60% of the main reinforcement designed for the middle of the slab. Okay, so at the middle of the slab, whatever the main reinforcement is there, in that transverse reinforcement must be minimum how much? 60%. Okay, so these two conditions has to be satisfied to become a flanged beam, to become a L beam or T beam. This is related to the effective width of the flange. So what is this effective width is? Suppose if you consider a beam like this, if you consider a T beam like this, means you have constructed a beam like this. Then whatever the whole portion of the flange is there, okay, whatever the whole portion of the flange is there, that will not be effective in nature. Okay, up to some portion only it will be effective in nature. Okay, only up to some portion it will be effective in nature. So we have to know what is the effective width of the flange. Okay, now there exist two conditions. One is the monolithic condition and second one is the isolated condition. Okay, one is the monolithic condition and second one is the isolated condition. What is this monolithic condition is? Suppose construction of a building where we are casting beam and slab together. Okay, we are casting beams and slab together. So in that condition, whatever the T beam is there, for that effective width of the flange should be taken as, okay, effective width of the flange BF should be taken as L0 by 6 plus BW plus 6DF. Okay, L0 by 6 plus BW plus 6DF. So here L0 means nothing but distance between zero movements in the beam. Okay, distance between zero movements in the beam. Now if you take a simply supported beam, suppose, okay, if you take a simply supported beam, then directly L0 equal to LE, that means effective span. Okay, L0 equal to LE. Okay, that is valid for the simply supported beam. Suppose if you take the continuous beam, you have to take it like 0.7 LE. Okay, for the continuous beam you have to take it like 0.7 LE. So like that it will be. Then if you take, and what is BW is, that is the width of the web portion. Okay, width of the web portion. So this is BW here. Then what is 6DF is, what is DF is, that is the total depth of the flange you have to consider. Okay, we have to consider the total depth of the flange. So using this formula you can determine the effective width of the flange. Okay, so what is L0 here? L0 is the distance between point of contraflexures and BW is width of the web and DF is the total depth of the flange. Okay, then If it is a monolithic L beam, then it has to be like BF equal to half of this value, L naught by 6, because for L beam, flange will be there only on one side, L naught by 12 plus BW we have to take. Why? Because whatever the width of the web is there, that remains constant. Okay, whatever the width of the web is there, that remains constant. Plus, again half of this value you have to take, 3 df. Okay, like that you have to determine. So this is related to the monolithic condition. But now sometimes it can be isolated condition. Okay, it can be isolated condition. Isolated condition means, suppose consider the construction of a footwalk like this. Now when you construct a footwalk like this, we will construct only one beam and one slab here. There won't be any adjacent beam, there won't be any adjacent slabs like that. Okay, then in that condition, what is effective width is BF equal to, suppose this is the T beam, then it is L naught by, already I told you what is L naught by B plus 4 plus BW. So what is this L naught here is that I already told you, and what is this B is the actual width of the flange here. Okay, B is the actual width of flange, and BW is as usual. So if you substitute them here, then you will get the effective width of the T beam and effective width of the L beam like this. Okay, so isolated beam means if you construct only a single beam and single slab together, whereas monolithic beam means whatever the slabs and beams together we cast in case of the residential buildings. Then next clauses are related to the deflections. Okay, next clauses are related to the deflections. Now first we will see the clause B, then we will go to the clause A. The deflection including the effects of temperature, creep and shrinkage occurring after the erection of partitions and the application of finishes. Suppose you have casted a beam like this. Then above the beam you may need to construct the partition walls. Okay, you may need to construct the partition walls, and you should also apply the finishes. Okay, you should also apply the finishes like this. Then after applying this, whatever the total deflection is, there, that should not exceed span by 350 or 20 mm, whichever is less. Now after this, after constructing the partition walls, after few days we will apply all the types of loads on the beam. Like we will apply the live load, we will place different things in the room. Okay, then whatever the load on the beam is there, that will increase. So now once if the load increases, the final deflection, that should not be more than span by 250, because the deflection increases in this case. Initially, after the application of partitions and finishings, it was span by 350 or 20 mm. But now it will be increased to, after application of all loads, it will be increased to span by 250. That's the clause. Next clause is related to the span to the effective depth ratio. So this span to effective depth ratios are given to limit the deflection. Now whatever the values you can see here, they are the maximum values. You should not use a span to effective depth rate. You should not use a span to effective depth more than this value. Okay, so for cantilever, span to effective depth ratio is maximum 7, for simply supported it is 20, and for continuous beam 26. But remember that these are applicable only for the spans up to 10 meter. Now if it is greater than 10 meter, suppose, okay, if it is greater than 10 meter, these values has to multiply with, that means 7, 20 or 26, this has to be multiplied with the 10 by span. Okay, so whenever these values are whenever the span is greater than 10 meters, whatever the values are given, they have to multiply with the 10 by span. And there are another two modification factors which we have to multiply. One is based on the tensile reinforcement and another one is based on the compression reinforcement. Okay, one is based on the tensile reinforcement, another one is based on the compression reinforcement. So totally 3 modification factors will be there, but The second one and third one are that important. Only first one is very important. Okay, that is a 10 by, we have to multiply the given value with 10 by span. Okay, then next class is related to the lateral stability. Okay, next class is related to the lateral stability. So now a beam is there like this. Okay, beam is there like this. Then suppose if the beam is simply supported, okay, the beam is simply supported, then whatever the clear distance between the restraints is there, okay, whatever the clear distance between the restraints is there, that should not exceed 60b or 250b square by d. Okay, 60b or 250b square by d. Then what if it is a cantilever beam? Suppose it is a cantilever beam, then the clear distance from the free end to the lateral restraint, okay, free end to the lateral restraint, that should not be more than 25b or 100b square by d. So this clause is to ensure what? Lateral stability. To ensure the lateral stability, the distance between restraints should not exceed 60b or 250b square by d in case of the simply supported beam or continuous beam, and 25b or 100b square by d in case of the cantilever beam. And next one is related to the two-way slabs. Okay, two-way slabs. So here, whatever the span to effective depth ratio I have given, they are applicable for both beams and one-way slabs also. Okay, they are applicable for beams and one-way slabs also, because one-way slabs are also designed in the same manner as the beams. Okay, then if you take the two-way slabs, for the two-way slabs, the short span to the overall depth, okay, short span to the overall depth, that means short span is Lx divided by overall depth capital D. This ratio should not exceed 35 in case of the simply supported slabs, and this should not exceed 40 in case of the continuous slabs. Okay, but remember that these classes are applicable only for the short span up to 3.5 meter, and if the loading is up to 3 kilonewton per square meter. Only in these two conditions, if these two conditions are valid, then only we can consider this criteria. Okay, then whatever these classes are there, they are applicable, whatever these two values are there, they are applicable only for the plain bars. Suppose if you use the HYSD bars, so these values has to be multiplied with the 0.8. These values has to be multiplied with the 0.8. So 0.8 means 35 into 0.8, that is 28, and 40 into 0.8, that is 32. Okay, so like this. Okay, so whatever the values given here, they are applicable for plain bars, so 35 and 40. Now if you want it for the HOSD bars, you have to multiply using the factor of 0.8. So these are applicable for the two-way slabs. And next one is for determining the bending moment in the slabs spanning in two directions at right angles and carrying concentrated load. Okay, now a beam is there, sorry, a slab is there, and this slab consists of what? A concentrated load. Okay, so now whenever the concentrated load is there, any accepted method approved by the engineer in charge may be adopted. The most commonly used elastic method. Elastic method means WSM, working stress method. So the most commonly used working stress method are based on Pigott or Westergaard's theory, and the limit state method is based on the Johnson's yield line theory. Now whatever the coefficients are given in the IS 456, they are based on Johnson's yield line theory because it is mostly related to the limit state method. And whatever the working, if you are doing using the working stress method, then you have to consider which method, Pigott or Westergaard's theory. Okay, so remember that limit state method, in the limit state method, bending moment coefficients are given based on the Johnson's yield line theory. Now a slab is there like this. Now from the slab, load will be distributed to the adjacent beams like this, supporting beams like this. So now how the load will be distributed is, so at the short span, these are the short span. So at the short span or else at the short beams, draw a triangle which forms at 45 degrees. Okay, draw a triangle or else draw a line at the angle of 45 degrees at both the corners. Then these 2 points will meet here. So whatever the load is there here, okay, whatever the load is there here, that will come under the beam 1. Whatever the load is there, that will come under this beam. Whatever the load is there, that will come under this beam. Whatever the load is there, that will come under this beam. Now this whole span is how much? Lx, suppose. Okay, whole span is Lx. And what is the total load on the structure? Suppose the load is W per square meter. Okay, W per square meter. Then total load on the structure will be W into Lx into Ly. Okay, total load on the structure is W into Lx into Ly. Now in this portion, what will be the load? This is Lx here. So this will be how much here? This will be Lx by 2. Why? Because this half will be Lx by 2, 45 degrees angle. So this will be also Lx by 2. Now what will be the triangle area? Half into Lx into Lx by 2. That is equal to Lx square by 4. So what is the total load coming on this beam is WLx square by 4, and that comes as a UDL. Similarly, the total load on this beam is also equal to WLx square by 4. Now once if you know the loads on these two beams, okay, once if you know the loads on these two beams and if you know the total load, then you can determine the load on these two beams also. Next clause is related to the column. Okay, next is related to the column. So first they have given the definition of column or strut here. What is column or strut is, it is a compression member, the effective length of which exceeds 3 times the least lateral dimension. Okay, effective length means LE. So effective length divided by least lateral dimension. If that is greater than 3, then it is called as column or strut. Suppose if it is less than 3, then it is called as what? It is called as a pedestal. Okay, if the effective length to the least lateral dimension is greater than 3, it is called as column or strut. If it is less than 3, that is called as a pedestal. Then a compression member may be considered as short when both the slenderness ratio Lex by D and Ley by B. Lex means effective length in the x direction, and D means, suppose this is the section of the column, then this is major principal axis, this is in the direction of major principal axis, and this is the direction of minor principal axis. Okay, now this dimension is taken as D here and this dimension is taken as B. Okay, now whatever the effective length in x direction divided by D, okay, this dimension, and Ley by this dimension B, if both the values are less than 12, okay, both the values are less than 12, then the compression member is considered as short. If it is greater than 12, then it is considered as long. Okay, so we can say like if the slenderness ratio is greater than 12, that comes under as long column. If both the slenderness ratios are less than 12, then it is considered as a short column. Next, clause number 25.1.3, this is related to the unsupported length. So what is unsupported length is, it is the distance between the clear distance between the restraints. That means one floor is there, another floor is there here. So, okay, now a column is there here. A column is there like this, suppose. Then whatever this clear distance is there, that is called as the unsupported length. But always the column will not be like this. Instead, what happens is, this is the beam and this is the column and this is the floor here. Okay, so now we have to measure it to the now the definition is clear distance between the end restraint. So this is one restraint here, this is one restraint here. So you should not measure it to the level of the floor here. Instead, we have to measure it to the level of the beam. So that point is given here. In beam and slab construction, it shall be the clear distance between the floor and underside of the shallower beam. Okay, so for that you have to consider that. Okay, Then next clause is related to the slenderness. Now the unsupported length between the end restraints shall not exceed 60 times the least lateral dimension. Okay, whatever the unsupported length is there, that should not exceed 60 times the least lateral dimensions of a column. But if only one end of the column is restrained, another one is unrestrained. That means suppose a column is placed like this, there is no restraint on this side. Then in this condition, the unsupported length should not exceed 100 b square by d. So if restraints are there on both the sides, then it should not exceed 60 times of the least lateral dimension. And if the restraint is there only on one side, it should not exceed 100 b square by d. Next, clause number 25.4. So this clause says that all columns must be designed. Okay, all columns must be designed for the minimum eccentricity. Okay, all the columns must be designed for the minimum eccentricity. So what is this minimum eccentricity is L by 500 plus lateral dimension by 30. Okay, minimum eccentricity is L by 500 plus the lateral dimension by 30. Okay, L means what is? L means unsupported length. Okay, L means unsupported length. So unsupported length divided by 500 plus lateral dimension by 30, that is considered as the minimum eccentricity. But in no case it shall be less than 20 mm. In no case it can be less than 20 mm. Okay. Then next class is related to the bar bundling. Okay, next class is related to the bar bundling. Sometimes what happens in the field is whatever the bar diameter is available, okay, whatever the bar diameter is available, that's not sufficient. Then in that case, what we do is we will bundle the bar like this. Okay, we will bundle the bars like this, or else we will bundle 3 bars, or else we can bundle 4 bars like this. So this is called as bar bundling. Okay, now whatever the 4 bars are there, or else 3 bars are there, they are tied like this. Okay, they are tied like this. Now this bar bundling is allowed only for the bar diameter less than 32 mm. Okay, it is allowed only to the bars less than 32 mm. If it is greater than 32 mm, then bundling is not allowed. Okay, next class is related to the development length. Now what is development length is? It is the additional length which we have to embed into the support. Okay, the additional length which we have to embed into the support, that is called as development length. Okay, suppose this is the beam, and in the beam the bar is like this, and now whatever the bar is there, in that tensile stresses are there, suppose. Okay, tensile stresses are there. So this tensile stress pull the bar out of the beam. Okay, tensile stress pull the bar out of the beam. Now we have to provide some anchorage here. Okay, we have to provide some anchorage here. Okay, so when you provide some anchorage, then whatever this concrete is there, this will hold the bar not to come out of the concrete. Okay, so this additional length we have provided, that is called as what? Development length. Now for this development length, the formula is phi, where phi is the bar diameter. Okay, phi refers to what? Bar diameter. Then sigma s is stresses in steel. Okay, sigma s is stresses in steel. Suppose if it is working stress method, it is taken as permissible stresses. Okay, it is taken as permissible stresses in steel. Or else if you consider the limit state method, then you have to take it as 0.87 Fi. Okay, so if you have to substitute these values here. Then what is tau BD is? Tau BD is the bond stresses in concrete. Okay, tau BD is the bond stresses in the concrete. Now this tau BD value you have to take from clause number 26.2.1.1. Okay, now whatever the tau BD values here given here, they are applicable for the plain bars in tension. Okay, they are applicable for plain bars in the tension. Suppose if you use the deformed bars, okay, if you use the deformed bars, then these values has to be increased by how much percent? 60%. Okay, if you use the deformed bars instead of the plain bars, the given values are increased by 60%. And suppose if you are using the bars in the compression, okay, if you are using the bars in the compression, then whatever the given values are there, they have to be increased by 25%. Suppose if you use deformed bars in the compression, okay, if you use deformed bars in compression, then these values has to be increased by 60% and 25%, then it will be like 100%. Okay, 100% increment will be there. Then whenever bars are bundled, whenever the bars are bundled, then in that condition development length has to be increased, because you can see like if bars are bundled, what happens to the contact area between concrete and steel? It decreases. That means if you place two bars like this separately, then concrete is here, concrete is here. But when two bars are like this and concrete is here, then obviously the area of contact decreases. So in that case, what we have to do is we have to increase the development length. Suppose if two bars are bundled, okay, if two bars are bundled, development length has to be increased by 10% and 20% for three bars in contact. If three bars are bundled, then it has to be increased by 20%. And if four bars are in contact, it has to be increased by 33%. Okay. So for two bars, it has to be increased by 10%. For three bars, it has to be increased by 20%. For four bars, it has to be increased by 33%, like that it is. Okay. Now, next class says that deformed bars may be used without end anchorages provided. Without end anchorages provided, given that is here, given that development length required is satisfied. Okay, now if this is the support and this is the beam, here if the development length provided is sufficient, then you need not provide any hooks, or else you need not provide any bends in case of the deformed bars. But if it is the plain bars, okay, if it is the plain bars, you must provide what? Hooks. Okay, so anchorages need not be provided in case of the deformed bars. Anchorages need not be provided in case of the deformed bars, but you should provide them in case of the plain bars. Now, the anchorage value of bend shall be taken as 4 times the diameter of the bar. Okay, whatever the anchorage value is there, if it is the bend of 45 degrees, okay, that means instead of keeping like this, you have placed the bar like this. So this angle is 45 degrees. Then anchorage length will be equal to how much? 4,5. The equivalent anchorage length will be equal to 4,5. Suppose if you make a 90 degrees bend like this, then it will be how much? 8,5. So like that, for each 45 degrees bend, anchorage value will be how much? 4,5. Now, if it is a hook, okay, if it is a hook, suppose like this it is, then how much is the bend angle? 180 degrees. So for 180 degrees, how much will be the value? 16,5. Because for each 45 degrees, it is 4,5. So for hook, it will be 16,5. Like that it is. Then next one is related to the anchorage of stirrups. Okay, now see this. When the stirrup is bent through an angle of at least 90 degrees round a bar, that means this is the stirrup. Now at the end, we have to close the stirrup like this. But while closing, what we do is, we provide a round up like this. Okay, we provide a round up like this. Now what is the angle of round up? 90 degrees. Okay, 90 degrees round a bar, at least of its own diameter, okay, at least of its own diameter, and is continued beyond the end of the curve for a length of at least 8 times of the diameter. That means this should be extended to the length of how much? 8,5. Now, if the bar is bent through an angle of 135 degrees, okay, if the bar is bent through an angle of 135 degrees, that means bar was bent like this, 135 degrees like this. Then in that condition, at least 6 bar diameters. Okay, that means you have to extend it to the length of how much? 6 times the diameter. Then if it is 180 degrees, If it is 180 degrees, that means you are providing a, you are bending the bar like this, you are bending the stirrup like this. Then in this condition, this length will be equal to how much? 4 pi. So this is when the angle is 180 degrees, this is when the angle is 135 degrees, this is when the angle is 90 degrees. Okay, like this. Hope it is clear. Next one is for curtailment. Okay, you know that whatever the main reinforcement is there, that can be curtailed in the beam. Okay, suppose this is the beam. This is the beam. You are placing some 3 or 4 bars here. Or else you are providing some 6 bars. All the 6 bars you need not place throughout the beam like this. Instead, you can do the curtailment. Now, whenever you do the curtailment, okay, see this, for curtailment reinforcement shall extended beyond the point at which it is no longer required to resist a flexure for a distance equal to the effective depth of the member or 12 times of the bar diameter. That means if you feel that here we don't need to keep 6 bars. Okay, that means in this zone maybe 3 bars are enough. Okay, in this zone maybe 3 bars are enough. That means how many bars you have to cut here? We have to cut 3 bars. Totally 6 bars are there, but here 3 bars are enough. So you have to cut 3 bars here. Now while cutting, the 3 bars has to be extended to the length of how much? D or 12.5, whichever is greater. Okay, maximum of D or 12.5. For that length, the bar has to be extended, then there it has to cut. Next, at least 1/3 of the positive reinforcement in simple members and 1/4 of the positive members in continuous members shall be extended along the same face of the member into the support to a length equal to LD by 3. Okay. So what is this? Is at least 1/3 of the positive moment reinforcement. That means suppose consider a simply supported beam. Then in that case, whatever the reinforcement is there, whatever the total number of reinforced bar is there, in that minimum 1/3 must be extended to the length equal to LD by 3 into the support. And if it is a continuous beam, at least 1/4 of the members has to be extended into the support. That is to the length of LD by 3. Okay, so listen this carefully. If it is simply supported beam, 1/3 of the total bars. If it is continuous beam, 1/4 of the total bars has to be extended into the support minimum to the length of how much? LD by 3. Okay, see the next class. So this class is related to the development length and restriction of bar size. Okay, restriction of bar size. Now as per this class, whatever the LD calculated, that should not be greater than, that should not exceed M1 by V plus L0. Okay, LD should not exceed M1 by V plus L0. Now what is LD here? LD is the development length, and what is the formula for the development length? LD equal to phi into, that means bar diameter into sigma S by 4 tau BD. Okay, now for the given grade of concrete, tau BD is constant, and for the given grade of steel, sigma S is constant. So what is variable is only phi. Okay, now whatever this phi is there, whatever this bar diameter is there, that is restricted with respect to this condition. Now here what is M1 is? M1 is moment at the section. Okay, M1 is the moment at the section. Okay, then what is L0 is? So what is V1 is? Okay, V1 equal to shear force at the section. Okay, V1 is the shear force at the section. Then what is L0 is? Okay, what is L0 is? L0 equal to, okay, now this is the simply supported beam, suppose. Okay, this is the simply supported. Now we will keep the bar like this. That means beyond the support, okay, into the support, we will extend the bar. Now this is the center of the support, suppose. Okay, this is the center of the support. So here we are extending the bar beyond the center of the support. Now L0 is the length of bar beyond the center of support including the anchorage. Okay, you have to consider the anchorage also. Okay, so if you substitute these, if you have to substitute these three things there, then we have to make the check for the development length, and that consider the that restricts the bar diameter. Then whenever there is a compression reaction, okay, whenever there is a compression reaction, then this m1 by v value has to be increased by 30%. Okay, that means if you take the simply supported beam, obviously there will be a compression reaction. Then in that case, the check will be like this: LD should be greater than, or LD should not be greater than 1.3 m1 by v plus L naught. Similarly, if you take the continuous beams also, at the support there will be compressive reaction. So you have to take like LD must be greater than or equal to 1.3 m1 by v plus L naught. So remember this point clearly. The value of m1 by v in the above expression may be increased by 30% when the ends of the reinforcements are confined by the compressive reaction. Okay, this is very important point. So in that condition, we are increasing this m1 by v by 30%. So now if you consider the fixed beam, suppose, then in the fixed beam, bending moment diagram will be like this. The bending moment diagram will be like this. So here at the support, bending moment will be what? A negative in nature. Okay, let us say UDL is here. At the support, bending moment is negative like this. Then at the center it will be positive. Again at the support it will become negative. So negative bending moment, positive bending moment, and negative bending moment. Now in this condition, here this point is called as point of inflection or point of contraflexion. Okay, this point is called as what? Point of inflection or point of contraflexion. Now wherever there is point of inflection, the negative reinforcement, that means the negative moment reinforcement, that means this portion is designed for the negative moment. Okay, this portion of fixed beam is designed for the negative moment. So whatever the reinforcement you have designed for the negative moment, that has to be extended. Okay, that has to be extended beyond the point of inflection. So actually here there is no negative reinforcement required, but still we have to extend it beyond the point of inflection for a distance not less than effective depth of the member or 12 phi. That means it has to be extended to the length of effective depth or 12 phi or 1/16 of the clear span, whichever is less. Okay, so in these three values, whatever is less, to that length we have to extend the negative moment reinforcement. Okay, so you need not extend all the bars there. Only 1/3 of the reinforcement you have to extend. Okay, so that is the thing. Okay, so as per this class, again I am saying 1/3 of the negative reinforcement should extend beyond the point of inflection to the length of D or 12 phi or 1/16 of the clear span, whichever is less. Then next class is related to the splicing of the bars. Okay, next class is related to the splicing of the bars. So you know what is the purpose of splicing? Okay, splicing is done whenever the bar length is not sufficient. Okay, suppose if you take the bars, they are manufactured to the length of 12 meters generally. But now suppose a beam is of length some 20 meters. Okay, beam is of length 20 meters. Then what we have to do? We have to splice the bars like this. Okay, we have to splice the bars like this. Now whenever the splicing has to be done, okay, whenever the splicing has to be done, at that section bending moment should not be greater than, okay, at this section bending moment should not be greater than 50% of the moment of resistance. Okay, at this section bending moment should not be greater than 50% of the moment of resistance. Then suppose at that section we are placing 6 bars. Okay, in the beam we are providing 6 bars like this. Then at a given section, not more than 50% of the bars can be spliced. Okay, not more than 50% of the bars can be spliced. So if 6 bars are there in the beam, you can splice only maximum 3 bars at the section. Okay, so two conditions are there. Splicing should not be done where the bending moment is. Okay, where the bending moment is greater than 50% of the moment of resistance, and at the given section not more than half of the bars can be spliced. Then remaining things are, conditions for splicing are, lap slices shall not be used for bars larger than 36 mm. Okay, bar is larger than 36 mm, we should not do the lap splicing. Then lap length including anchorage value of hooks for bars in flexural tension shall be LDR 35, whichever is greater. Okay, so now the thing is, if you take the flexural tension, if the bars are placed in the flexural tension, then the length of splicing should be maximum of LDR 35. Okay, LDR 35. Suppose if it is the direct tension, if it is the direct tension, then it is maximum of whichever is high. Okay, 2 LDR 35, whichever is high. Okay, so length of splicing, okay, length of splicing must be LDR 35, whichever is high. If the bars are in flexural tension, if the bars are in direct tension, then it is maximum of 2 LDR 35. Okay, then the lap length in compression shall be equal to development length in compression, but not less than 24.5. Okay, not less than 24.5. Again, if you take the bars in the compression zone, their length of splicing, must be LDR 35. Okay, LDR 24.5, whichever is higher. Okay, whichever is higher. So these are the three things here. Then when bars of two different diameters are to be spliced, the lap length shall be calculated on the basis of diameter of the smaller bar. Okay, whenever you are lapping two bars of different diameter, okay, this bar may be 16 mm diameter and this bar may be 12 mm diameter. So in this case, the length of splicing must be calculated. Okay, the splice length must be calculated according to the smaller bar diameter. Okay, that's the clause. Okay, next clause is related to the spacing of the bars. And this clause is especially minimum spacing of bars, of course. Okay, now if you take the beam, okay, consider a beam like this, then in the beam we will keep the main reinforcement like this. Okay, we will keep the main reinforcement like this. Now whatever the clear distance between the bars is there, okay, whatever the clear distance between the bars is there, this distance should be maximum of the, okay, the distance should be maximum of the diameter of the bar if the diameter are equal. Let us say this is 12 mm or this is also 12 mm. Okay, or else the diameter of the larger bar if the diameters are unequal. Okay, let us say one is 16 mm bar, another one is 12 mm bar. Okay, and 5 mm more than nominal maximum size of coarse aggregate. Suppose coarse aggregate used is 20 mm, let us say. Okay, coarse aggregate used is 20 mm. Okay, then the horizontal distance between two parallel main reinforcing bars shall usually will not be less than greatest of the following. Okay, whatever the minimum spacing is there between the horizontal bar, whatever the minimum horizontal distance between the bars is there, that should be greater of the following, that should be maximum of the following. Okay, what is that? Diameter of the maximum bar, or else if all the bars diameter are equal, you have to consider the diameter of the bar, then nominal maximum size of coarse aggregate, okay, coarse aggregate size plus 5 mm. In these three conditions, whatever is maximum, that should be the minimum horizontal distance between the bar. Now sometimes what we do is, if you take a beam, we provide the reinforcement in layers like this. Okay, we provide the reinforcement in layers like this. Now whenever you place the reinforcement in layers like this, then whatever the clear distance is there, okay, then whatever the clear vertical distance is there, the vertical distance between the bars shall be 15 mm or 2/3 of nominal maximum size of aggregate 2/3 of size of aggregate, nominal maximum size of course, 2/3 of maximum nominal size of aggregate, or maximum size of the bar. Maximum size of the bar. Again, you have to take greatest among the following. Okay, so in these three, whatever is the greatest, that should be the minimum vertical distance between the bars. Okay, then next clause is related to the spacing between the bars in the slabs. Okay, spacing between the bars in the slabs. Now if you take a slab like this, then let us say the bars are like this, and this is the main reinforcement. Okay, whatever I am showing here, this is the main reinforcement. Now whatever the maximum spacing between these bars should be 3 times the effective depth of the solid slab. Effective depth means again you have to take to the centroid of the reinforcement. Okay, so 3D or 300 mm, whichever is small. So whatever the maximum spacing between the bars is there, whatever the maximum spacing between main bars is there, okay, whatever the maximum spacing between main bars is there, that should be minimum of 3D or 300 mm. Okay, then if you take the transverse reinforcement, this is the main reinforcement, then transverse reinforcement will be in this direction. Okay, and this transverse reinforcement we provide to make the resistance against shrinkage and temperature. And the distance between, I mean you cannot see here, but if you take the another view, okay, if you take the side view, then you can see the transverse reinforcement or distributing bars. Now whatever the distributing bar is there, in that the spacing should be minimum of 5D or 300 mm. Okay, minimum of 5D or 300 mm. So the spacing between the main bars, the maximum spacing between the main bars is 3D or 300 mm, whichever is the minimum, or maximum spacing between the distribution bars should be 5D or 300 mm, whichever is minimum. Okay, so that is about the slab. Okay, next one is the nominal cover. So what is this nominal cover is? Suppose consider a beam cross section like this. Then there are two main bars in the beam like this, and here also there are two bars in the compression zone. Now whatever these bars are there, they have to be tied with the stirrups. Okay, whatever the bars are there, they have to be tied with the stirrups. Okay, these are the stirrups, let us see. Okay, this is the stirrup. Okay, now what is nominal cover is? It is the reinforcement cover. It is the cover design. It is the concrete cover designed for all the reinforcing bars. That means whatever the cover is there, it should be considered from the bottom of the stirrups here. Okay, from the bottom of the stirrups. So this cover is called as nominal cover or clear cover. Okay, nominal cover or clear cover. Then if you take it to the centroid of the reinforcement, then it is called as effective cover. Okay, hope the difference is clear. Effective cover means you have to take it to the centroid of the reinforcing bars, whereas nominal cover means you have to consider it. Nominal cover means it is the cover to all the reinforcing bar in the beam cross section. Okay, so see this, nominal cover is the design depth of concrete cover to all steel reinforcement including links. And the condition is in no case nominal cover shall not be less than diameter of the bar. Whatever the bar diameter you have placed there, so this nominal cover should not be less than the bar diameter. Okay, that's the condition. Okay, then see the next one. For a longitudinal reinforcing bar in a column Nominal cover shall in any case not be less than 40 mm or less than the diameter of such bar. Okay, now if you see the column cross section, suppose. Okay, then whatever the bars are there, this is the column cross section, not the beam. Okay, so whatever the cover is there, whatever the nominal cover is there, that should be how much here? Minimum 40 mm or bar diameter. Okay, so in this two, whatever is maximum, okay, in this two, whatever is maximum, that should be the minimum cover here. Okay, and suppose if the dimensions of the, okay, in the case of column, in the case of the columns of minimum dimension of 200 mm or under, suppose if the dimension of the column are less than 200 mm, in that case the minimum nominal diameter you have to provide is, nominal cover you have to provide is 25 mm if the bar diameter is not exceeding 12 mm. For the footing, minimum cover should be 50 mm. Okay, so for the column usually it is 40 mm except the column size is less than 200 mm, but for the footing it is minimum how much? 50 mm. Okay, then to meet the durability requirement, nominal cover is also defined. Nominal cover standards are given. If it is the mild exposure, minimum nominal cover required is 20 mm, moderate 30 mm, severe 45, very severe 50, and extreme 75 mm. Okay, so if it is a footing, suppose, okay, if there is a footing and if the footing is constructed in an extreme condition, for the footing already I mentioned that the minimum nominal cover is 50 mm, but here it is 75 mm. So you have to consider maximum of this. So in that case, how much you have to provide? You have to provide 75 mm. Of course, some modifications are there here. These are not that important. You can ignore them. Then next class is regarding the minimum area of tension reinforcement. Okay, minimum area of tension reinforcement. So minimum area of tension reinforcement is AS by BD equal to 0.85 by F5. That means it will be equal to AS equal to 0.85 BD by F. That is the minimum area of tension reinforcement you have to provide. Okay, then maximum area of tension reinforcement. The maximum area of tension reinforcement is 0.04 into gross area. Here we are considering the, while taking the minimum area of reinforcement, we are taking the effective area, but here while taking the maximum area of tension reinforcement, we have to consider the gross area. So 4% of the gross area it is. Okay, then why there is a restriction of maximum area of tension reinforcement is, suppose if this is the beam and you are keeping lot of bars there, or keeping so many bars, then is it easy to keep the concrete here? No, it's not easy to fill the concrete. That means it will be congested. So considering that, it is saying that the maximum area of tension reinforcement is restricted to 4% of the gross area. Similarly, the maximum area of compression reinforcement, that is also restricted to 4% of the gross area. Then next class is related to the side face reinforcement. Okay, next class is related to the side face reinforcement. So what is this class is? Suppose if the depth of the web exceeds 750 mm, if the depth of the web exceeds 750 mm, then at the sides you have to provide the reinforcement like this. Okay, at the side you have to provide the reinforcement like this. Why? Because whatever the beam is there, that will be subjected to the, mean if the size is greater than 750 mm, the depth of the web is greater than 750 mm, beam will be subjected to the lateral buckling. So in order to avoid the lateral buckling, you have to provide the side face reinforcement, and that area of side face reinforcement should not be less than 0.1% of the web area. Now whatever the side face reinforcement you are providing, that should be distributed equally on both the sides. Okay, it has to be distributed equally on both the sides, and the spacing between the side face reinforcement, okay, and the spacing between the side face reinforcement, it should not exceed 300 mm or web thickness, whichever is less. That means suppose web thickness is 450 mm and this is 300 mm here. So whatever the spacing between these two bars are there, that should not exceed 300 mm, minimum value you have to take. Then maximum spacing of shear reinforcement measured along the axis of the member. Okay, maximum spacing of the shear reinforcement measured along the axis of the member shall not exceed 0.75 D for vertical stirrups and D for the inclined stirrups. You know, in the case of the shear reinforcement, I mean this is the beam cross section, suppose. this is the beam cross section. Next one is regarding the spacing between the stirrups in the beam. Okay, spacing between the stirrups in the beam. So now whatever the stirrups are there, the spacing between the vertical stirrups, okay, spacing between the vertical stirrup, that should not exceed 0.75 d. Whereas if it is the inclined stirrups at 45 degrees, in that the spacing should not exceed effective depth, that is d. Okay, so remember that for vertical stirrups, spacing should not exceed 0.75 d. 0.75 d. For inclined stirrups, it should not exceed how much? It should not exceed d. Now, in no case, whether it is the vertical stirrups or inclined stirrups, in no case the spacing cannot exceed 300 mm. It should not exceed 300 mm. And next class is related to the minimum shear reinforcement. Okay, minimum shear reinforcement. So here, this is the formula to determine the minimum shear reinforcement. Now here ASV means area of the stirrup legs. Okay, area of the stirrup legs. Then SV is the spacing between the stirrups, and Fi is the grade of the Fi is the characteristic strength of the steel, and B is the width of the section. Now whatever the 0.4 is there, that represents that we have to design the shear reinforcement for the minimum shear of 0.4 Newton per mm square. Okay, we have to design the shear reinforcement for the minimum shear of 0.4 Newton per mm square. That's the clause. Next clause is related to the torsional reinforcement. Okay, basically this torsional reinforcement is also provided in the form of longitudinal reinforcement and transverse reinforcement. Now whatever the transverse reinforcement is there, okay, whatever the transverse reinforcement is there, in that the spacing of the stirrup shall not exceed x1 plus y1 by 4 and 300 mm. So let us see what is that. Again, this is the beam cross section, and we have the bars like this, and these bars are enclosed in the stirrups. Bars are enclosed in the stirrups like this. Now what is x1 is? X1 is the center to center distance here. Okay, x1 is center to center distance in the stirrup, which is called as a shorter dimension of the stirrup. Okay, x1 is called as a shorter dimension of stirrup. Then what is y1 is? Y1 is the longer dimension of the stirrup. Okay, y1 is the longer dimension of the stirrup. That means if you take y1, again here center to center of stirrup you have to consider. Not the center to center of bars, you have to consider the center to center of stirrups. So here whatever the spacing between the stirrups is there, I mean when you consider the torsion, that should be least of x1 plus y1 by 4 and 300 mm. Then when the cross sectional dimension of the member exceeds 450 mm, okay, when the cross sectional dimension of the member exceeds 450 mm, you have to design additional longitudinal bars. That means so already we have designed the main reinforcement, but whenever the effect of torsion is there, we have to provide the additional longitudinal bars. That's the condition. Then in case of the slabs, the mild steel reinforcement in either direction, that means whether it is the main reinforcement or distribution reinforcement, if it is the mild steel reinforcement, it should not be less than 0.15%, and if it is the deformed bars, it should not be less than 0.12%. It should not be less than 0.12%. And again, this is the gross area. So if you consider mild steel reinforcement, it is 0.15% of the gross area. Minimum area of steel you have to provide is 0.15% of gross area. If it is the HOSD bars, it is the 0.12% of gross area. Then whatever the bar diameter we provide in the slab, okay, whatever the bar diameter we provide in the slab, that should not exceed 1/8 of the total thickness of the slab. 1/8 of the total thickness of the slab. So whatever the bar we are using, that should not exceed 1/8 of total thickness of the slab. Okay, suppose let us say depth of the slab is, overall depth or overall thickness of the slab is 100 mm. Then 100 mm by 8, how much is that? 12.5 mm. So bar diameter should not exceed 12.5 mm in this condition. But do you have the bar size of 12.5 mm? No. So bar diameter should be restricted to 12 mm in this condition. Okay, like this you have to calculate the maximum bar diameter. And next provision is related to the column. Okay, now if you take the column, the cross sectional area of longitudinal reinforcement shall not be less than 0.8%. Okay, so the minimum longitudinal reinforcement you have to provide is 0.8% of the cross sectional area, and it should not be more than 6% of the gross cross sectional area of the column. So minimum area is 0.8% and maximum area, okay, this is the minimum, and maximum area is how much? 6%. The minimum number of longitudinal bar provided in rectangular column will be, okay, so if you take a rectangular column, the minimum number of bars you have to provide is 4. Suppose if you take a circular column, then the minimum number of bars you have to provide is 6. Okay, so in the circular column it is 6 and in the rectangular column it is 4. Then in the columns, in no case the bar diameter shall not be less than 12 mm. Okay, in no case the bar diameter shall not be less than 12 mm. Then whenever you want to provide the helical reinforcement, okay, whenever you want to provide the helical reinforcement, in that condition you have to provide at least 6 number of longitudinal reinforcement bars. Suppose if 4 bars are there, you should not provide the helical reinforcement. So helical reinforcement can be provided only when you have minimum 6 number of bars. Then suppose this is the column and we place the bars along the periphery of the column, like this. Then along the periphery, whatever the spacing between the bars is there, that should not exceed 300 mm. That should not exceed 300 mm in case. Then in case of the pedestal, okay, in case of the pedestal, already I told you what is pedestal. Pedestal means whatever the slenderness ratio is there, that should be less than 3. Now, in case of the pedestal, whatever the nominal longitudinal reinforcement we provide, that should not be less than 0.15% of the cross-sectional area. So, in case of the pedestal, whatever the nominal longitudinal reinforcement we provide, that should not be less than how much? 0.15% of the cross-sectional area. Okay, these are the provisions related to compression members. Then next one is pitch and diameter of lateral ties in columns. Okay, so now if you take the pitch, suppose this is a column. Now we will provide the stirrups in this direction. We will provide the lateral ties in this direction. Now whatever the pitch is there, that should be least of the following distance. Okay, whatever the pitch is there, that should be least of the following distance. That is, first one is the least lateral dimension. Okay, first one is the least lateral dimension. Second one is the 16 times of smaller bar diameter. Okay, 16 times of the smaller bar diameter, and third one is 300 mm. So whatever the pitch we provide, that should not exceed least lateral dimension or 16.5, where 5 is the smaller bar diameter and 300 mm. Then if you take the diameter of the lateral tie, okay, if you take the diameter of the lateral tie, in no case it is 6 mm only, there is a mistake. Okay, it is in no case it should not be greater than 1/4 of the diameter of the largest longitudinal bar. Suppose largest longitudinal bar is 24 mm, or else let us consider it as 32 mm. Okay, and in no case less than 6 mm. Okay, so 1/4 of the diameter of the largest longitudinal bar, that means 32 by 4 mm, 8 mm. Okay, but it should not be less than 6 mm in any case. Okay, so the point is, whatever the lateral tie we use, for that the minimum diameter should be 1/4 of the diameter of the largest longitudinal bar. Then if you take the helical reinforcement. Okay, if you take the helical reinforcement, the pitch of the helical turns shall not be more than 75 mm nor more than 1/6 of the core diameter of the column. Okay, so the point is whatever the maximum pitch is there of helical reinforcement, that should be smaller of 75 mm or 1/6 of core diameter. Okay, 1/6 of the core diameter. That is the maximum pitch. Similarly, if you take the minimum pitch, that is greater of 25 mm or 3 times the bar diameter used for helical reinforcement. Okay, so maximum pitch of helical reinforcement is smaller of 75 mm and 1/6 of the core diameter, and minimum pitch is greater of 25 mm and 3/5 helical. Then last class here is for the structures exceeding 45 meters in length. Okay, suppose there is a structure and the length of the structure is 45 meter. In that case, you have to design for one or more expansion joint. Otherwise, you need not design the expansion joint. You can, expansion joint we provide by considering which effect? Temperature effect. So this temperature effects can be ignored if the structure length is less than 45 meter, but if it is greater than 45 meter, you have to consider the temperature effect and you have to provide one or more expansion joint. So these are the important clauses in section 3 of IS 456-2000. Hope all of you enjoyed this video, and if you like this video, you can subscribe to our YouTube and Telegram channel. And in the next video, we will see the clauses related to the section 4 of IS 456-2000. Thank you.